Hello and welcome to the aggregate calculations training. As we're going through this, please feel free to follow along using the companion workbook that's attached to the video. The first example we're going to go through is simply how one can leverage calculations within Tableau. And by this I mean, can I put various levels of aggregation into a single visualization? I'm going to start here with a blank sheet and I'm going to drag department out to rows. I'm then going to expand that into category because I really want to see my sales information at a category level. I'm going to drag sales out to columns, and you'll notice we're summing this right away. This is because the summation is the default aggregation attached to this measure, but that by no means is a way of saying that we can't change that. If I drag sales out again here, you'll see we sum it, just like we did before because of the default. But if I click this drop down here, I can change that aggregation from sum to average. You'll now see that I've got an average sales and sum of sales on the visualization. Instead of left clicking and dragging and dropping, I'm going to use my right click here and right click and drag sales out to the column shelf here as well. And I also want to see the minimum of my category. So I'm going to see my minimum sales for each category here. And I'm going to do the exact same again here with maximum. And you'll notice that when I use the right click, drag and drop, I get this dialog box that appears that gives me all of the aggregation types I can use. This isn't just specific to measures, this can be done with dates and other dimensions as well. So here I'm going to choose maximum, and now you can see that although we don't have the most stunning visual here, we do have all of the appropriate information shown that I want to see at different levels of aggregation. Our next example here talks about using and changing the default aggregation of a measure within Tableau. Again, I'm going to start with a blank sheet and I'm going to drag region out to rows. Next, I'm going to bring our order quantity measure out, and you'll see that right away we have this aggregated as a maximum. That's my default aggregation on order quantity, but I don't want that to be the default every time I use this measure in a visualization. So I'm going to go over to my measures list here, right click order quantity, and change the aggregation from maximum to average. Because every time I want to use order quantity, I want to see average except in specific cases. And you'll see here changing that default aggregation did not change the copy of order quantity in the visualization. Changing it only affects subsequent times that measure is used. So as you see, I drag order quantity out again, and now in lieu of maximum as the aggregation type, I get average. The next example we have here, now that we've talked about default aggregations as well as using multiple aggregations in a single view, is really starting to dive into the calculations. For each of my countries in my data set, I want to see the sales, the count distinct of how many items that have been sold into that country, as well as the sales per item calculation. So we're just going to start out here by dragging out country, and then sales, which is going to give us that default summation. And I want to right click and drag my item out here, right to the column shelf. And just like we saw with sales, we get all the different aggregation options here, and I want count distinct. So I'm just going to double click that, and I'll turn labels on. So now what I want to see is a calculation that divides my sum of sales by this count distinctive item. So how do I do that? It's fairly simple. We just have to right click our measure here. Anywhere in the measure dimensions list will do. I'm going to wrap my sales in our aggregation, so our summation here. And I'm going to divide that by our count distinct of item. These are both aggregation types. You can see all of the aggregate functions by hitting that aggregate dropdown. We're going to cover a couple more of these, whereas the rest can be seen in other videos as well as the documentation. And we'll call this our sales per item. And the aggregation here is necessary because we're aggregating up to a country level. If we were to do this at the row level, this would become a completely different calculation. But I really want to see sum of sales for Argentina divided by the number of items I sold in Argentina. So that's now a calculation down here, and we'll drag that out. The first thing to notice, other than the fact that the calculation is functioning, is that we have this option here that just says agg. And what that means is that you cannot change the aggregation of this calculation by clicking the drop down like we could before. And that's because we've set that specifically in the calculation by using sum on sales and count distinct on items. And I'm going to sort by this and just see, which countries have the highest sales per item. And though the United States is at the top of the list, it's pretty obvious that's a bulk of my sales. So maybe I want to investigate what's going on in Fiji and Iraq and see if I can market the specific small subset of items I'm selling there better. Our next example uses a calculation and an aggregation that we haven't seen before, and this is the attribute aggregation type. And we'll go over, once we're in the visualization, what exactly that means. So I'm going to come drag out region to rows, and I'm going to quickly create a profit ratio calculation. So I'm going to right click my profit and choose create calculated field. So we want our sum of our profit divided by the sum of our sales, and we'll call this our profit ratio. I'm going to drag this into the visualization after I format it here, because we need to format this as a percentage so that it displays correctly. And now we've got that. Great. Let's turn on labels to make this easier to see. So now what I want to see is I'm an Eastern sales manager. I want to see how much more does my profit ratio have to grow for me to hit the international profit ratio. So I want to create a calculated field using my profit ratio. Basically what I want to do here is multiply my profit ratio by 1.25 to see if I would reach the threshold of the international profit ratio. The problem with this is this calculation runs this calculation on every single region. So this will increase all of the profit ratios. But really what I want to do is increase West profit ratio. Just as an example. So what I need to do here is call out the specific region that I want. So if my region is equal to West, since I'm a Western and an Eastern manager, I'm really just interested in the West here, then profit ratio times 1.25 for this specific region, else just return the profit ratio. And it looks like we're good, but we get this error. And it's saying, hey, we can't mix aggregate and non-aggregate comparisons in if expressions. And that's because region is not aggregated in any way. My profit ratios in both instances are aggregate calculations, as you can see. So what I need to do here is assign an aggregation here. And I'm going to use attribute. And all attribute does is check if the minimum of this row in the table is equal to the maximum. So in other words, is there anything other than East here? There's nothing other than East, so we'll just return East as the attribute of region. There's nothing other than West here, so similarly, we'll just return West as the attribute of region. If there were multiple entries in a single subset of the table there, we would return an asterisk saying, hey, we don't know what the attribute is because the minimum is not equal to the maximum of this row. Min or max will also work as aggregations here. It's just important to understand what attribute actually does. So now we can drag this out and see our results. And now we'll see that I increased it by 25%, but I'm still only at 16.25% as a profit ratio. So I still have a long way to go. If you want to see an example of this as a more dynamic calculation, refer to the solutions workbook attached to the video, as this can be parameterized both on the side of the increase or decrease in profit ratio, as well as which region we're selecting. Thanks for watching and happy analyzing.